Greetings, and to whom it may concern, or at least to whom it may be watching this video. My name is Brian Dickens, and I was that kid in the red shirt holding up the robot in the picture. And I was born in 1975. I'm recording this by my clock by 2014. And I don't think you should necessarily trust clocks, but that's what mine says. So I'm making some videos now and doing some archiving to collect things from when I was a kid and deciding if something is important enough to frame or if it's not important enough that it can just be scanned and discussed and thrown out. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the scanned information from board games from my childhood, and not board games that I played, rather board games that I made. I would save scraps of cardboard whenever I could get my hands on them, or anything that looked kind of interesting that I might be able to use. So before I go into the board games, I just want to mention kind of an interesting thing, which is that I didn't really play any board games. I only made them. I was much more interested in playing video games, had an early Pong-like machine, wanted an Atari 2600, ended up getting an Intellivision, and this was what interested me more. The fact is that when these games were coming, they had cartridges, they were not programmable, so if you wanted to sort of get into the dreaming of creation of a game, it wasn't like today where they have things like Little Big Planet or whatever. And I actually had what was kind of a rare opportunity for a kid at that time, which was to have access to an Osborne 1, which had a little tiny few-inch large screen that could only show green text. But the games, you could write there. They just didn't look anywhere as good as the console games, which, of course, look kind of silly today. So getting together pencil and crayon and glue and cardboard was kind of a surrogate for the fact that I couldn't make the games I wanted, and so I would make these board games. So the oldest game to survive was Rule the Universe, and the pieces survived, the boards didn't. I sort of photoshopped a fake cover for the box here of what the boards looked like, and there were tons and tons of pieces, which I'd made because I just gotten this green stencil, and so the pieces were all sort of supposed to be some kind of thing, but they were all stencil shapes. And the main premise of the game was that you would play on all these multiple boards, that you would put them kind of all around the house, and they would represent planets. Each was a sheet of loose leaf notebook paper that had crayon on it to make it look like a planet. And so I'd gotten inspired to think about the idea of a board set that would break down and fit into a box by Rail Baron, which was a game that was way over my head and I never played or knew how to play, but it had a segmented board that you would take out of the box and clip together. So really that was the core of the idea. I didn't have any gameplay other than thinking that there were some things that could be in the air and some things that could be on the ground, and they would fight somehow, but I never worked out what that was. And mostly what I had was pencil and crayon. I did have access to a few like fine point pilot pens that my dad would bring home from work, but I didn't really have markers. And also markers were very frustrating because they seemed to dry out or run out very easily, and so I'd only use them for small things. In this case, apparently to accent which team you were on by making some feature red, which when I was making a backstory for it and trying to kind of think of a plot that was funny, I thought it was interesting that on the plane team it seemed like there was a mistake, just this random guy who has red on him in the wrong team, so I thought maybe he was a spy, and that all these people are gymnasts because of how they are contorted, and that maybe this is a war between gymnasts, and it broke out when one group of them got mutated. So that was the backstory I put to it here in 2013 when I put it into a box and sent it to a friend of mine who was a big game player, Paul Grasshoff. He has a giant board game collection, 200 of them, that he keeps in his garage, and I thought he might be able to appreciate or take it out and show it to people sometime and have them laugh. So it was pretty clear that I didn't really want to make a boring board game. I wanted like an epic space battle because I didn't want to think through all the rules of how would you roll dice or how would you move. And that theme comes up in some other the early games where I was simulating video games. This is another one where only the pieces survived, called Links. And the idea was that it was a board divided into squares, but these pieces that were 2 squares large were sort of like bridges. That on the front side they had arrows, and on the back side they had this Links logo. And what that meant was that when they were flipped upside down, the bridge was out. And so it was like a game like Pitfall, where the platform or the territory that you're walking on is changing out from under you, and you have to deal with a changing board. But I had to implement that via rolling dice and spinning spinners or whatever I could come up with. So Links actually had a sequel, Links 2, and here you can see it had more parts. It had more links. It had, I think, 6 of them, but only scanned 2 in order to give coverage because the others were just copies of that. And so more complicated. I would make my own dice. This you can see it kind of flattened to be scanned, but there's a lot of Scotch tape on them. They were very poor, unfair dice, but I wasn't considering the fairness aspects of dice. And on this one, the board survives. You can see I was calling myself the GameKeeper. I actually don't remember that, but that's actually written on a couple of these games. But it's definitely a misnomer for me. I didn't keep any of this stuff. The only reason this survived is because I gave it as a Christmas gift here. And you can see the date was 1986. I would have been 11. And so I gave it to my grandparents. And yeah, my mom would be the GameKeeper in this case because she's the one who saved it. And once again, I have thrown them all out because I just don't think hanging on to this is a great idea. But my compromise was to make these scans. So I looked on an age to grade conversion chart. I guess 11 would be 6th grade, so the end of primary school, about to go to secondary school the next year. And so I could do some cursive handwriting. It's very messy, and there are directions included at least, but they're definitely kind of jumbled. And I was making these by myself. It wasn't like I was getting to play test them, and I didn't play them myself. So really it was just an idea, and I would say how the game worked without knowing anything about how fun or not fun it was, which is still kind of funny. So long as we're on the topic of confusing directions in games, this is Don't Lose Your Marbles and Marble Mini Golf, where I had taken popsicle sticks and marbles and little used rounds out of cap guns that would make little popping noises when you shot them, and when they're used, that you can't really do much with them. But I decided that they were going to be the holes in these marble mini golf courses, and this was a game that you would actually build yourself. You would sort of lay out the boundaries of the course with the popsicle sticks, and then you would put the holes in terms of the caps, then try to hit them with the marbles. And Don't Lose Your Marbles is another game you could play with it, where I was trying to define some kind of game you could play with marbles. I didn't know how to play marbles, and again, there was no internet, so basically I just would look at marbles and go, I know there's some game associated with this, I don't know how to play it. So I tried to come up with a sort of a counting kind of game, and it's a ridiculous game if you read the rules. And I do have some mixed feelings here. I do wish that someone had maybe taken a more active role in helping me with challenges of like how to make the games better, and there wasn't really involvement coming from family on that. And I think part of that is just let the kid be a kid and don't put pressure and be like, oh, this has to be correct or fun. And also my dad liked video games more than the old board games in those days too. I think he'd rather play those, so maybe it's sort of a combination of that. But I really would have liked to have had some mentorship to point out to me how it could be better, and I might have grown up to enjoy board games and be able to play them. This little part here at the end is funny. How I've written out the instructions and tried to explain how to play, and then say, sorry if it's confusing. Like I'm putting that in the directions. All that said, not all my ideas were bad. I mentioned a game here that was one I remembered that did not survive. That was pretty cool, called Magnetic, where it was a board that at various times you would turn it, and the direction of effective gravity, I mean, it wasn't gravity because it was flat on a table, but which of the four walls of the board was had an attractive force would change based on that wall becoming magnetized, and so everything would get adjusted, and so it was like the direction of gravity had changed. And I saw this much later and was reminded of it by a game called Blast Chamber, which I saw for the PlayStation. I was curious enough about the gameplay of that I bought a copy from the used game store to play on my roommate's PlayStation. So this game, I guess I'd seen a hex game somewhere. I certainly didn't understand what the logistical reasons of why people prefer to play on hex games for the sort of mathematical reasons of distances and sort of some of the fairness aspects that you get out of a hex game versus a square grid game. And when I was loading some of these games, I actually did work on them a bit in Photoshop to try and make them the right color. So here are the parts. They're actually independently loadable layers, and when I got the scan, from the little LED based scanner that I have, the color didn't match the game that I had, so I would tune it and tweak it until it actually looked like the right shade, holding the board up to the monitor. And by putting all the parts independently on it, I thought that maybe I could use this as the basis, or someone could use it as the basis of actually making a game out of it, because I don't really remember what the game was. It had something to do with these, there were many more of these hexagons that were used as some kind of barriers to the center, and you would try to, attack them and get them removed, like you're shooting through a bunker. I think there was something like that, but I don't really remember. And here's another one that I really did take the time to go through and put in all the layers in Photoshop so they could be worked with independently, and that you could move them around and possibly build some kind of interesting JavaScript game based on it. And I even have the back of it here where you can see it says it's the 10th game by GameKeeper, and I don't know how accurate a count that is. It seems like I think there were more, but maybe that was just the ones that I decided I was going to take credit for. I don't know that I would have counted Rule the Universe in that, because it didn't fit my standards of what a game was. So I'm not really sure what that count is, but what I do know is that this pretty much represents the end of me making these kinds of games of my own volition, because I had gotten somewhere around here my own TV to hook up to the computer in my room, and so I didn't have any free time I had I spent on that, not kind of disconnected and not having anything to do because my parents were watching television or something of that nature. So it is kind of the end of that era, and I spent a lot of time on this one in part because I really wanted to practice with Photoshop. The original import of the board, I just would scan it and look at it and go, oh, it just has entirely the wrong colors. And so there was a lot of photo processing that I did. And in addition to all the processing, I went in to go really high resolution. I did this at a large level of scanning, and the board was bigger than my scanner, but I still went through and stitched it and got a lot of practice. So these days, I'm pretty good at Photoshop, in part because I've been taking on these little projects. So I think I'm pretty good at it now. So the premise of this game was that it was for up to 4 players, and for each arrow-shaped square on the board, there was an arrow-shaped piece that you would put in the initial position to the orientation of the arrow on the board, and then during the course of the game, you would have opportunities to turn those to either send an opponent in the wrong direction or to get you closer to a goal. So it was an arrow game. And the inspiration for it, I believe, had come from a video game called Ultimate Wizard, which had these portals that when you ran into them, you just had to follow the way that the arrow said, and so that they would also change sometimes, so that you would hit one, it would change direction. Now this one was actually kind of sophisticated. It was something I chose to do for an assignment. We were told to make some kind of math board or card game, and I decided to make a variant of Scrabble that you would make equations. So you would have tiles that represented the numbers and operators, and it was this board that you could unfold, and it was very big. I don't know exactly what it was that motivated me to make it so big, but I thought that would be cool, so that's what I did. And it's taped together and made it very hard to scan. I did kind of scan it, but I didn't spend a lot of time. I thought the photographs were better. And I had these two pens, calligraphy pens, that were double-ended and had a blue and a red one. And I think I pretty much used up those calligraphy pens making this game, making all these tiles, and before I ever practiced calligraphy. And it was pretty clever, I think, as a kid in 6th grade to get that idea, especially because there's no internet or anything like that to find out if anyone else had the idea. I just had the idea. There was no such thing in the store. I'd never seen it. But today, if you go look for Scrabble-related math games, other people have done it, and I'm certain that they probably put more thought into the distribution of the numbers and exactly how to do the game. I just think I threw them in there by guessing, and I did write down a table of what those numbers were, so they're stored in another archive. And so if anyone wants to go back and do a numerical analysis to figure out exactly how badly I did in the balance of that game, they can. And I just want to throw in a quick story that cracks me up to this day about two other games that other kids brought. One was called King of the Monsters, and this kid had drawn flash cards where they had these gnarly looking monsters on one side, math problems on the other, and they'd all be laid problem side down on a table, and you were supposed to pick the one you wanted to solve. And you would do this until you found the King of the Monsters. And then when you did, the game was over. But it was fixed. The King of the Monsters was written on the underside of the card, and so it had no replayability. But there was one weird card that wasn't like any of the rest. It was a little ballerina, pink, no gnarly monster at all. And so when other kids came to play, they just pointed right at it and go, "Well, I'll take the ballerina." And so you turn it over. It says, "You have found the King of the Monsters." So it was game over instantly. I think it's interesting because it is true. Often it is the little pretty girls who are the monsters. And another one was this kid who had brought an inflatable globe, and the teacher said, "Okay, well, what's your game?" And he said, "It's called World of Math." And she goes, "Well, how do you play?" He says, I throw the globe to somebody, they catch it, and then I ask them a math problem, and I'll tell you if they get it right or not. So he hadn't done any preparation. He just brought an inflatable globe. I think those are two very funny stories to this day. So we're going to time travel a couple years into the future, into 8th grade. And in science class, we were given the option for our final review project, a project that we did to get us ready for the final exam, to make a game was one of the options. And so I made one called The Bridges of Knowledge. And I based it loosely on making fun of, actually, a game that I had as a kid called the Allowance Game. And in the Allowance Game, which was kind of a variant of Monopoly to try and teach kids to do their chores and save money, the idea was that as you would go around the board, each time you would pass go, the state, these cards that could be either in a chore done or a chore not done state, and it would have a drawing of a messy room on one side, say room messy, and on the other side it'd be room clean. And so how much money you got when you passed around on the board depended on the state of these cards. And so I decided to do an homage here with the different books that you had to maintain in the science class. So there was a lab book and a learning log and a science notebook. And so the idea was that you had to get you had to get those all organized and then make it to the center of the board. And the 4 different players were light bulb, screw, and battery, and rock. And they actually were a light bulb, a screw, a battery, and a rock, kind of like the Monopoly hodgepodge of objects. And it's interesting because I went and looked up the allowance game today, and it looks like they've taken out the chores entirely. So it's just about the money. So it doesn't have the cards that you turn over. And so that was interesting to look up on the internet today. And the game had just hundreds of cards. The only ones that I bothered to scan were the ones that had pictures on them. I don't think it's necessary to preserve my messy handwriting on all the other ones, but I did type them all in. So the ones that were just textual questions and answers, I made a big list of them, and I was reading over them, and some of them I hit them and I'm going, is that actually true? And I thought about it, and I always have these kind of questions like, well, it's not, there's always a more questioning response I would have to any of these declarations than I did at the time. But, the learning was very one way, memorize this and we tell you the answer. But today I think that some of the answers, I could give much better answers. But anyway, just to go to the game itself, there were 4 topic areas. There's optics and electricity and chemistry and physics in the Newtonian sense. And so you had to collect a bunch of little tokens. I didn't scan the tokens. They were from another game. And the idea was that when you got everything, enough points, and you were all ready, you would get to the center of the board, because each of the concentric things on the outside were a different subject area. The 4 colors represented the 4 subjects. So you had to go around each one and then cross the bridges to get to the final goal, but you wouldn't be allowed into the center until you were finished. It's kind of like Trivial Pursuit, where you have to get all the pieces of the pie and then go to the middle. But in this case, the middle was these things called scantrons. So teachers wanted to do this automatic grading and kind of like the SATs and whatever. So we used these in that science class. And the teacher had a policy, which was that there were 2 ways to get 100 on your tests, and one was to get all of the questions wrong, and the other was to get them all right. So if you wanted to shoot the moon and try for it, you could try and get all your questions wrong and get 100. I don't recall if anyone ever did, but he said that if you did that, but if you got one right, you would really only get one right. So you had to get them all wrong in order to get 100%, and that was pretty funny. But I managed to get a blank one of those scantrons and fill it in and fake it up as a graded 100% as the final completion, because this was preparation for that final. And there's one game I did for an assignment that didn't make it, partly because it was large. It was 3-dimensional and built into one half of a, kind of a foam-sided cardboard thing that was in a packing material in a larger box. And I made paths in it, so the squares were actually circles that were caps off of milk jugs, because my mom would keep those and had a lot of them, and she still keeps them to this day. I think there's a lot less reason, if there ever was a reason, to be keeping them now, but she did, so that's what I used. But it didn't make it, and there were possibly others, but nothing that really comes to mind to describe. But at this point, all the games have been destroyed except for Rule the Universe, which is in Paul's custody as long as he wants to keep it. He doesn't have to. But I'm sad that none of the games were like the first version of something that became important, because there was an important idea or an important aspect of gameplay to them. And I think I could have been that good. I think I could have been a good game designer very young if I had the resources. So I really, whenever I'm dealing with people on the internet who are dealing with like kids who are trying to learn to program, and then they give them a bad experience, like, you have an opportunity here. You maybe this is somebody whose environment isn't teaching them, and you're just attacking them. If I could have outreached back then and known that it was a possibility to write people who worked in the board games industry, or and to have the possibility for this global kind of connection, some of these games might have went on to become successful or be fun. And now the only way that would happen would be if somebody took pity on them and decided they were going to, accept them as a constraint and then try and produce a way of making them fun. But it would basically be completely redesigning them. And to throw in one last thought, I actually was looking up a picture of the Candyland game because I wanted to talk about how what I didn't like about Candyland as an introductory game for kids is the fact that the gameplay has no free will, and so a lot of the games I used to play, it was a lot of roll the dice, not a lot of decision making, and even if you did make decisions, there wasn't a lot of guidance on how to make them. But when I was going to look for the picture, I found this other thing that made me think even even further. Let's talk even more about lack of choice. And it was parents apparently getting mad because Candyland has been redesigned. The first one that I never saw from 1949 to the one that I saw in 1978, and the only anthropomorphic or living characters on there are the kids, and then it got redesigned to add a bunch of Alice in Wonderland characters to the board in the 80s. And now those characters who have been redesigned to be kind of more slick and also what they think is too sexy, because they're wearing makeup, and I don't know, they consider adults considering it to be sexualized and having a problem with this. And I think the thing is that it's just furthering this notion of no choice, like the idea of deciding for kids what kind of cartoon they look at when it's just a drawing, and not being able to interact with them long enough to let them make choices or make up their own mind is kind of representative of the gameplay of Candyland. So it's a lot better to use games, be they video games or be they board games or whatever, as an opportunity to educate, and not just kind of throw kids in with nonsense and leave them to figure it out on their own, which is what it seems a lot of people tend to do. And so I was working in isolation on these, and I certainly think that was the wrong way to do it. I think you should have some interaction, and that interaction should be about choice and helping you define what you're trying to accomplish with your game or with your life.